started? You want,
Sure.
you want it when, okay. It's like magic. Oh. I got it. Oh, here it is. Yes.
Can you reach it?
Yeah, I can get it. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that too much? Okay, all right. I'll try to be immobile so I don't mess up anything on the system.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you came. And this is the conversation that the discernment, and I think the vestry decided one of the topics should be the spiritual vitality of the church and us as people. In part because we ranked lower there in terms of our responses to the survey than we did on anything else. But that's not as interesting as what you all experience and think about spirituality. So let's start with just a conversation about what does spirituality mean to you? Or spiritual vitality, that's what it was supposedly measuring. Spiritual vitality, what does that mean?
I think faith.
Faith?
Yeah.
I like that William James quote of religion is what people do when they're alone.
Not the only thing.
All right, those are not the only thing.
And did you mean spirituality or did you mean religion?
It was that book of his called The Varieties of Religion.
Religious experience, okay.
I think that's where I got it. But
Okay.
It was catchy because when I'm with other people, I'm not generally thinking about my spirituality.
Okay.
Sorry that I'm not.
The part of spirituality that I admire the most is of course, the people who can maintain this more or less thoughtful, meditative attitude and just take it into the world and try to keep it in mind for all the tasks. Now, that's not, I'm not saying I do that.
Yes.
But I think it's a goal worth thinking about.
I get confused about the word spirituality because it's got, for me, it's got two meanings in the form of visions. When I think of one vision of spirituality, I think of a hermit, a monk, a nun, separated and meditating, alone in a chapel somewhere or out in nature, and just focusing only on the relationship between that person and that person's God. You know, that's one form of private spirituality. But then there's another kind that is more like energy, and it works in communities between people. And that's another kind of spirituality. Now, they are connected, I think. You probably can't have one without the other. I'm not so sure it goes both ways, but in order for having spirituality in a community, a person has to be somehow well-founded privately, too. And that's perhaps the way I see it, those two different kinds. And it's easy to miss one if you're looking for the other.
Jim, do you just
Oh,
have
if we could,
your religious
if Jerry could just get something.
Speak up
Yeah.
really loud or pass the mic, otherwise this will all be just a waste of time to be recorded.
Okay.
Do
So
we have the
mic?
hand mic?
There's a mic behind you.
Oh, okay. Bob, could you lean back and get the mic?
We put it in the middle, but that's on the, it's on
And
the altar.
mic, just don't tap your feet because they'll pick it up.
Okay, let's put it
why don't we just pass it around?
If you're going to pass it around, take it off the stand.
Yeah.
That sort of implies we have to.
No, I don't think so. Speak in order. No, we don't.
Did you want to speak next?
I wanted to ask
Yeah.
Jim whether he was, that's hard for old people.
I'll just throw it next time.
That would be good. I was
Oh,
wondering
hold it up
whether-
to you. Oh, yeah.
I was wondering whether you were thinking of religious communities when you were speaking of individual and community.
Yes, I was, actually. I was thinking about a religious form of spirituality, and I was thinking of the various kinds of Christians in the past that had thrived alone as, meditators, and I wondered how good they would have been in a community hour like downstairs a minute ago. But then there's another kind of energy in a church when you have a group singing and group worship that's a little bit different. Or is it? I really don't know. But I see those two different forms or expressions of spirituality.
Anybody else? What does spiritual vitality mean to you?
Well, this is the other end of this spectrum from William James, but I think, so I'm going to quote from Audre Lorde, and I think of her definition of eros as kind of a deep emotion that's shared. And so I think when we're together, there's a collective spirituality when perhaps we're all raising our voices in praise, or, but that energy gets collected in that sharing moment, and for me it elevates, and it takes me out of myself to a degree, which I think is also part of spirituality, and a feeling of oneness with others, with the universe,
Any other comments? Where do you want to go next?
I just would add a little something. So Bob and I, years ago, used to be Unitarians for about, 4 years or so. And there was all sorts of things we really loved about the Unitarian Society, really great values and activities and things. But what I think we ultimately discovered, that for us at least, there wasn't spirituality there. And it was basically, the exterior part, but not sort of the deeper roots that connected to, first of all, a tradition, and then also that gave us skills to sort of be in the world, including with those people, but be in the world in a larger sense as well. So I think spirituality is sort of, it's the bread for the whatever journey that we have, is one of the definitions I would say. I guess you don't, I don't need that either.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I hope you heard that.
Well, so I'll bring up the provocative part, which is that on most of the things on this survey that we all took, New Song came out as very vital and very healthy and very flexible. We came out actually fairly low on spiritual vitality. And I'm curious why people think that was. I can tell you the 4 main things that were measured. One was my spiritual experiences often impact the way I look at life, and a little over 50%, no, that's not percentage. This compared us to 200 churches across the spectrum, from evangelical to mainline. And we were at about a little higher than midway in terms of the numbers of us who answered that affirmatively. The second one is my spirituality is really the basis of my whole approach to life. And we were under 30%, so not even a third of us affirmed that. And then I experienced the presence of God in my life. We were at about 5%, so quite low. And then I worked to connect my faith to all the other aspects of my life. And we were, again, about 25% in terms of comparison with other churches.
I may be wrong, but I thought when what's her name was here, she said it also included the whatever response we gave to the, I believe the Bible is fully inerrant.
She was mistaken about that.
Okay.
And that on one place where we were hugely high was theological, progressive, or conservative. And that's where that,
Okay.
so it didn't have to do with that. It had to do with these kinds of questions, kind of personal experience of God.
Yeah, the way, I don't remember how the question was phrased, but the way you just phrased it sounds a little like proselyting.
I work to connect.
Proselytizing. I work to incorporate my faith in the rest of my life. Sounds a little like recruiting people.
So that may be one reason why people answered more negatively, if they interpreted it that way.
Well, I think that community activities are important, is one important way of deepening our spiritual experiences. I certainly have profound spiritual experiences elsewhere, like when I'm out in nature. But I, to be honest, am not, I don't find our service very spiritually uplifting. And a major reason for that is because it's rote, and it's rote on things that are ancient but not any longer alive. You know, the Nicene Creed, of course, is the center of my complaint. You know, having to just repeat that, and I don't believe that stuff. You know, it's all metaphysical theology from an era past. But that takes up time. That takes me away from any possibility of really having a spiritual experience in church.
If I could give an opposite reaction to our liturgy.
Hold up, please.
I love the liturgy because its familiarity allows me to hear a phrase, to go from that to why are we still repeating it? How is it relevant in my life? And I expand on it in my head. And when I get a priest who goes lickety-split, I have trouble. I have to have it, you know, a measured pace, and then I can do this thought around all the liturgy. And I'm constantly doing that thinking during the entire process. And of course, I love the music. And that does give me the feeling of oneness. And I'm not thinking beyond, but even there I'm thinking of the meaning of the words. But it's an easier process. It's a less disciplined process for me.
I know some people over there, I think, wanted to say something. I don't need a mic because I'm already mic'd. I do think that's a continuing challenge in any Episcopal church, but in New Song as well. I know in the liturgy team, we have conversations about, well, we have this set liturgy. How do we make it fresh and vital for people like Bob who don't get as much meaning out of the sort of the, you know, the rain of the, you know, trickling down of the repetition. So I think that there are ways to enliven our liturgy in ways that might be more engaging to people. That's my point.
Can you talk to us just a little bit about the change in the, Talk to us a little bit about the change in the Eucharist. The wording on that has been refreshed. And I think it's pretty successful, but what's the process by which a change like that takes place?
Should I take that?
Sure.
Okay. So there are approved liturgies by the National Church, and the one that we're using now is one of those that's been approved. And so we can't just make changes that aren't part of the national program. And so this was a liturgy or a Eucharist prayer. It's sometimes called the Prairie Eucharist because there are a lot of prairie references in it. It's been under development for years, and it finally received official approval. And so now any Episcopal church would be able to use it. It's the discretion of the individual churches which one of those patterns that they want to use.
When I was part of Trinity in the contemporary service there, Mel was the priest, and there are several creeds in the New Testament that we used instead of a Nicene Creed.
You want to take that one?
Sure.
Oh, you don't need it.
Oh, I don't need that. It's easier being Catholic than Episcopal sometimes. When we wanted to use an alternative creed a couple years ago during Lent, I think it was, the bishop rejected what we wanted to use. And Mel was able to do that because they have more than one liturgy at Trinity. So if they have one liturgy, if a church has one liturgy with the tried and true, then you can be more experimental in the other one. We did get permission we used a Celtic creed, but it had to be personally approved by the bishop. So.
Is that the case with the Lord's Prayer also, when we use the New Zealand?
My impression that we could use the New Zealand because that is part of the Anglican Communion, and so.
Although we sent a couple of creeds that were New Zealand and Church of England, and they were refused. They have to be approved. Yeah, so it has to be approved by your bishop.
And which bishop were we dealing with?
The new one, Bishop Betsy. Yeah.
I mean, I think we have a pretty progressive bishop now.
Well, she's the one that had trouble with us wanting to do something different. Yeah.
I probably agree more with Mary Jane that I really like the repetition in the liturgy, and there are parts that I just tune out, like the Nicene Creed. Okay, but I could imagine that there are some changes, subtle changes in emphasis in Sunday Eucharist that would appeal to me and help me be spiritually vital. But then there's the other 6 days of the week. And what I find carrying on from Sunday is, one, the music. And so I've talked with Linda several times about having the recessional hymn be something I know so I can sing it to myself in the shower. And the preaching. And I think that's one of the strengths of our model of our church is that we have so many different people talking about different things that are really thought-provoking. I go, oh, and that carries on through the week. But I could imagine that a new priest might, and the liturgy team would come up with some novelties that would allow us to stay in touch with the music and the preaching throughout the week. So, Facebook, and I wouldn't complain if every morning when I sign on to Facebook, I do sign on to Facebook, there was something from New Song that said, please consider look to the east. Okay, meditate on that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea.
I was going to say, and thank you for what you said. For me, the spirituality of our worship is more than just what happens in the liturgy. Although I agree with both of you, having grown up with all the cadences of the Episcopal liturgy. It's just in my blood. But the other sources of spiritual experience to me are what surround it. So the music, yes. But also, I particularly appreciate in churches where you walk in and there is quiet before the service begins as a time to settle and find that connection that helps me enter into the liturgy. And that is one thing I don't find here. There is a lot of talking before Linda starts playing. The silence after the sermon is a particular place that I think enhances my sense of a spirituality in this community. But I remember answering that question and thinking about the rest of the week. What other things, what other practices does this community support in developing my spiritual life? And I'm not sure what my answer to that is. I know there are things going on that try to address that, like the Taizé service, and Dorothy's going to do in January, I forget what it is.
Contemplative prayer.
Contemplative.
Centering prayer.
Those kinds of things.
And the Wednesday evening programs, once a month.
Which I have not been able to make.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I was answering that question, I was thinking about, I would love to have more of that speaks to the rest of the week.
And I think that that's really what this question is this section was trying to get at, because there was a whole section on liturgy where we did evaluate our liturgy, and I think overall we rated it very strongly. And this was the only section where we didn't rate ourselves, we weren't rating anybody else in the church, rate ourselves as vital, what they call spiritually vital. The other one that I forgot to read, which we did rank very high on, 90% as compared to other churches, is a statement, although my faith is important to me, I find there are other things more pressing in my life right now. So some separation between the things that are pressing in life and faith. We rated ourselves very high on that.
It does separate the two, doesn't it?
What does?
Other things in my life versus, did you say spirituality?
Faith is what
Faith,
the
yeah.
language
I mean,
used here.
Those aren't always separate, that's all I'm saying. Things going on in your life should involve your spirituality, and I think
And this says
did.
that it does not.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this says we find a separation because other things are more pressing.
I wanted to follow up what Laura said made me think of I value silence also. I wish that silence after the sermon was longer and not spending 30 seconds at the beginning listening to the vibrations and 30 seconds at the end, so there's a minute left of real silence. But also, just in general, I find the Episcopal service is very wordy. We spend a lot of time reading things together, and I hate reading in great groups.
Hey, Elizabeth?
It just struck me that, at least when I answered the question, and this came up when Catherine was talking about the difference between our sort of practical life, doing the things we have to do, and spiritual life, which to me sounds sort of internal and woo-woo, and I don't consider myself, that kind of person that has an imaginary friend, and all that cultural sort of rhetoric around spirituality. And I think if we consider that there's such a thing as faith in action, that doing good in the world can be considered part of a spiritual practice. If we change our language a little bit, I think we might have come out a bit better in the survey. That's just my 2 cents. Oh, sorry.
I wanted to say, because New Song is so, all of us have such diverse backgrounds. I'm constantly thinking about, boy, you're a high church gal, and I know Bob is not, and I know other people are not. And we are all here together. And I think that the committee does a pretty darn good job of trying to satisfy needs among all of us. And I think that's a very complex task because spirituality is so deep. Faith is deep. And so as long as we all get what we need somewhere, I think that's the important piece.
I was talking to Elizabeth's point. I was involved in the recount for the Johnson County election, which didn't end till Wednesday morning. Well, the attorney from Des Moines who was representing Christina Bohannon was the loveliest person I have ever seen. So, and this may be part of his professional practice, but he was working the room, introducing himself, saying lovely things to everyone, being everybody's friend. And I mean, his obviously philosophy is that you catch more with honey than with, you know, this is a practical thing. But I kind of picked up on that as almost, you know, it was almost spiritual. He said, you know, we're all here. We might as well be kind to each other. So I started talking to the Republicans sitting next to me. And, well, there were 4 of them, and at first they were looming and acting really weird, and I made friends with them, so just picking up on Steve's, Wayrow's idea that we have to be here all together, let's be friends. And so I started yakking with them, and a couple of them were actually friendly. The other 2 were weird, but that's, and I don't know, by the end, everybody in that room was friends. I mean, you know, we were getting along, we were communicating respectfully, and of course, it might help that a major conflict didn't come up. But if we all have to be in a room together, see, and that's, to me, that's faith in action, but I wouldn't, you know, is remembering, recognizing that this fellow is living his faith and being kind to people and recognizing, well, I could do that too. These Republicans who flew in from Southern California and from, I mean, they flew in from all over. I can be kind to them too, and we can all get along, and the auditors, and we can be very, very appreciative of all the work the auditor's office did. Well, see, I wouldn't have answered that question. That question was very conventional. But I view that as something that being part of a faith community has trained me to do, is to recognize when something good is going on and joining right in.
Good way to put it.
I was just trying to put everything together here as I've been listening. And we were talking about common services, which means we all use the same words. But there is a problem, or there's a danger there, and that is, if I may use the analogy of household pets, and if somebody has had cats, when somebody says the word kitty cat, you get all emotional. You have an emotional connection to that word. And other people will say dog, doggy, and I didn't have a dog, and I might not respond to that word in the same emotional way. So that emotional connection to the word is also the answer to the spirituality question. Because if the word means something to you personally, you will be uplifted. And if it doesn't, you won't. So that's a choice of words very often that leads to a degree of spirituality. But then there's something else involved, and that is, as Emily was pointing out, your willingness to allow the people who love dogs to enjoy that word, even though you may not get a kick out of it. And the same thing is true with the people who love cats. And so if it's a question of creeds, for example, and some of us don't like the Nicene Creed as much as some other people might, it's still it's still a good experience to grant them that moment of joy, even though it may not be so joyful for you. But that's the sort of the compromise you have to make in a large group with all sorts of different values and different definitions of spirituality. So that's a connection between the wording and then the relationship of that person to both the group and to their maker.
I will just point out real quickly that only 2 of the 5 measures here had the word spirituality in them, so they had other ways of describing personal spirituality.
So I'd just like to follow up on just a couple of, no, I'm good. A couple of things that might relate more specifically to what you're talking about. So that balance between how talkative people are at the beginning of the service and the people who would like to have it be more contemplative, which we have heard that comment before. So one suggestion that I have been thinking of, we have this lovely bowl. It's a beautiful sound. And so maybe we keep it at the back of the church and we bring it to bring silence. There's a short time of silence and then the music starts. And so, to sort of try to accommodate people, it is nice to connect with people too, but then also to have more of a centering. So that is one possibility. I don't know what people think about that, but the other is, I think one of the most successful things that we've done in the past year in terms of participation has been outside of Sunday morning, has been the Lenten programs that we had last year, which were really well attended, and I think a lot of enthusiasm about them. So we need to come up with ideas for this coming Lent. So if you could be thinking about that, or we could talk about it if we have time this morning, that would be really wonderful, to build on some successes that we've already had in terms of nurturing spirituality outside of Sunday morning.
I just want to bring us back a little bit to the search process, that when Meg went through these with the committee, she was surprised and somewhat concerned by how we rated ourselves in terms of spiritual vitality. And I think our question is there something we would be looking for or longing for in a new priest that might enhance our spiritual vitality? Is there something,
I think I could. It seems to me, I'm kind of still resonating with what Bob said, because I taught literature and I didn't teach it from a Christian perspective. I just taught it from the perspective of the time and the place and the author. And so, in a sense, I think, but of course I'm not anywhere near as smart as God, I think when I walk in the church, I sort of check my rational brain at the door. Now, that is very likely not the case. And I enjoy parts of the service because I enjoy the language or I love the sermon. But it is the practice of a more spiritual experience in the church that doesn't necessarily have to do with rational thinking that I appreciate. And, I'm thinking I'm 2 people. I have 2 different brains, but actually God is smarter than I am, and I'll bet you he's working really hard to get those 2 parts of my brain together.
I just want to say, related to that rationality, and I'm not sure what it means to have God in my everyday life. How does that question go?
I experienced the presence of God in my
I experienced
life.
the presence of God. And part of it's it's kind of that intellectualism and snobby elitism and all that kind of stuff. But you know, those people who are like praying on the football field, or, you know, something good happens and it's praise the Lord, or, you know, for me, they're bringing God into something that's beneath God, and, you know, and maybe I just need to have my consciousness raised that God's in everything. But, you know, I don't think God's in all the stuff people are bringing God into. So I think for me, maybe I just need better ways of thinking about how God is. I mean, I think I'm better at feeling when God's not present. And so, yeah. And you think, so I don't know, maybe God is present in my life, and I just don't feel it until God's absent. But I don't know. So it's not a language I think probably a lot of Episcopalians speak.
I think a lot of it is a language
So one question we might ask ourselves is there a way or ways our lives might be richer or even more effective as disciples if we were more aware of God in our lives? I don't know. Something to consider.
But how do we make that happen?
So I would answer your question, which I would, after listening to people, say that I would want a priest who is attuned to both developing individual spiritual practices and lives, and can support and recognize the ways in which this congregation is impelled to put faith in action. And because I have personally been around ordained persons who are very good at one and terrible at the other, and vice versa.
And what are the two?
One would be to create ways to develop a personal, a spiritual practice, spiritual awareness. So in my experience, that might be creating a retreat experience, which is not going to be for everybody, but might be something that someone would try for the first time if it were offered. Or developing prayer practices. Someone who is good at developing those things, but is also good at recognizing and supporting ways to put faith in action.
So my response to that would be a little different. For me, it's I would feel the presence of God more in a priest based on their personal qualities rather than their administrative qualities, like developing programs and that sort of thing. It's sort of like, there's a way I think all of us can sense someone who is kind and decent and good, and you say, okay, God is in that person. That's the kind of person I'd want for a priest, regardless of their administrative abilities, and regardless of, I think it's even more important. What you said is important because, developing spirituality in others.
I didn't mean administrative things.
Well, you kind of said organizing programs and,
Okay, that isn't what I meant.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then I misinterpreted. But anyway, my basic point is more personal qualities than an agenda to improve our spirituality, I guess.
Any other comments?
It sounds what Elizabeth and Laura are saying is that we want a priest who's a good teacher, and that can teach both spiritual vitality and spiritual depth, and how to be an effective actor in the world. And exemplify it, yeah.
Any other comments, either about how we rated ourselves in this way, or spirituality in general, or what we might be looking for in our next priest?
I remember looking at those questions and asking myself, what did the person who wrote the question mean when they used a particular word like spirituality or some of the other words? And I kind of, if I try to put an emotional word into a physical form, I kind of think of the evangelicals who raise their hands and, pound their hearts and do all sorts of physical things to express their emotional side. It's not what I like to do. I'm uncomfortable doing it, but that's what I envision. And so if I read the question and I assumed they were talking about one particular kind of spirituality or spiritual life, then I would say they had one form, we have a different form, but if that's the form they're looking for, then I'd have to rate myself lower so that I wouldn't associate myself with that.
Of course, from the perspective out in the back, it's very interesting to get a really broad overview of what people feel that we are and that we need. I'm going to comment about our visitors today, having a nice conversation with Keith. He grew up very evangelical, very Baptist, went to an all-historic African-American college, is a realtor, became Episcopalian because his wife is Catholic. His wife is extremely active in a group out of the Kansas City area that tracks Christian nationalism, anti-Semitism, all those kinds of things. And they kind of chose New Song by what they've seen of us online. Like they did a little research before they came today. And so spirituality is, of course, what we feel within this organization, but it's also what we project out to the world. And he said, I knew right away, he goes, when I was watching your live streams, I noticed that you had all these various preachers. He goes, I thought that was so cool. And he goes, and I said, well, we're a group of activists. He goes, I knew that right away from the opening prayers of Advent. So is spirituality, in that question, it almost, and I think somebody commented too, what did they mean? Like we're clapping our hands and jumping up and down and all that. It's a very broad thing for all of us. I'm like with Mary Jane, there's a part of me that still is very high church from my days as Catholic. And I love the bells and smells, and I love the tradition, and I love all that, as well as I love how contemporary we attempt to be all the time. But I think also we have to remember how our spirituality projects to the world. And that was a great reflection from him today about they wanted to come here because they know that we were different or that we were appealing. I also told him to put in his application.
Well, one thing I will just say in defense of holy cow, I think that's what this consulting, it drove me nuts when I first, it's a huge consulting firm. They consult with denominations, lots of denominations all over the country, and they claim, and I think they must have the data to back it up, that this survey is scientifically valid. They talk about evidence-based discernment, which I think is an oxymoron, but we won't go there. But I guess I do encourage us. I was surprised when I saw this rating for us, because I find this place very spiritually vital. And I think there is something to people defining it different. But I also, my hunch is that they're picking up on something that would enrich our lives, because I believe spirituality does enrich the human life. So I would just encourage us to continue to ask ourselves, what might we be called to undertake or experience or explore that would enliven us spiritually? Whether you were talking about the Nicene Creed, we had a class on creeds last year, and which was one of the conditions for us to get to use the different creed. Deanna Johnson said she considers the Nicene Creed like her grandma's cast iron skillet. You know, you can just put anything in there, and it's been around forever, and it's tried and true. And, you know, that's a pretty experiential way to say the Nicene Creed. So I just encourage us to continue to think about these things. And, of course, I would, because it's my pet thing.
Well, and following up on that, I'm wondering, just call out some things you might be interested in for the Lenten programs. Yes.
So I was talking with Linda, and she told me all sorts of things that I didn't realize that the state is doing to the education system to, eliminate allusions to things like social justice and, rights of marginalized people. You can't even say gay and all this. So I think that would be a really interesting Lenten series. And if she could do, and since she was, I said you should do a spirit school, but a Lenten series might give us more time to talk about those important issues that I wasn't really very aware of.
They've even outlawed the phrase social justice in public school classrooms.
So I think that could be good.
Oh, Crystal? Oh. Yeah.
Couple things. First, I don't know about any of you, but when it comes to addressing myself and saying what I'm really good at, I'm really hard on myself. And I almost wonder if you can have a really high vitality rating for the church and yet low for yourself. And I'm wondering if part of that is that you can always tell that there's something that you need to improve on yourself. And I'm wondering if it maybe is that. And things that I'm trying right now is I have an app on my phone that displays a Bible verse and has chimes. And I find that that really quietens me down and makes me think of God. Another thing that I do is I try to think of things that I'm thankful for every day. And I will thank you, God, for this, or thank you, for God, for that. And it makes me try to be more present with God. Even if I'm driving in the car, and I find it very helpful. So, but I really think that people are harder on themselves than anybody else, and that we all really do get a lot out of church and out of community. And I really appreciate being able to come and meet with you all and pray with you all. And then I just feel so blessed today. So thank you for that.
We're so glad you're part of us, Kristen. Yeah.
Thank you. The one thing that I wanted to comment a little bit on is, people are talking about the noise. They want to come in and have quiet time, and I really like that too. I like to do the readings ahead of time so that when the person who's reading reads, I can just listen. But we are a tiny little church. We don't have a narthex where people can, and we're friendly. So when people come in at 5 to 10 or 2 to 10 or after 10, we greet them. So there's going to be noise. I mean, I don't know how we can prevent that. I really don't. I love what you do after the sermon. I love hearing that. I mean, it just puts me in the, thinking about what's been said. I love it. And the other thing about for me, my spirituality, I go to the food bank every Wednesday. It's the middle of the week, John. It's a great time to, I mean, it just, because there are people there who don't speak English, who need to get registered to get food, and you're just helping people, and it's just a wonderful place to be, and it really just feeds my soul.
As far as ideas for Lent, one possible book I read many years ago, and it impressed me, but maybe there's something better. It had a title, it was a little tiny book, paperback, On Being a Mystical Musical Bear, something similar, by Fox. And it was about putting your faith in, I mean, you can be spiritual by putting your faith in action. I mean, that's what I remember. I'm sure it said a lot more.
I just want to raise the question that perhaps the Bible is not sufficient to stimulating everyone's spirituality, and that thinking outside the Bible might be helpful. I think one of the good things about our spirituality is being open to other beliefs and ways of doing things. But not all of our passages that we read once a week are, conducive to a deeper spiritual introspection. And I know that Betsy's not going to say, okay, you can substitute.
But how about doing a Lenten series studying the Quran, reading the Quran, which probably most of us have never done.
It's really boring. It's really short.
And as a way of being in solidarity with people who are going to get targeted very soon.
What we might do is perhaps a series in which we invite faith leaders from other traditions and say, well, how do you find God? How do you, inspiration from other traditions that we could invite people in to learn from their spiritual practices.
And also from, not a single author of the Bible is a female. And I think a lot of the mystics were probably trying to supplement what is left out of the Bible, including that deep spiritual connection to God that doesn't have anything to do with hierarchy or, establishing your credentials or anything like that.
So one thing I will add is let's not just think of Lent, because we have our whole lives ahead of us.
Because it's great.
So it's not, we're not choosing one over the other.
Oh, Lent only. The rest of my life. Whoops, excuse me.
That might
out your ears.
Another idea it's kind of Bible and kind of not Bible is I used to know a poet. He's Presbyterian, but he's okay. He wrote a series of poems about women of the Bible. So it really, some short, some long, but really points out a lot of things that are kind of hidden in the Bible passages, but
they're hidden really well.
They're hidden really well, but his poems were good for me of drawing out some of those, I never thought about it that way kind of thought.
Well, I think we have a tradition of, good creative interpretation of the Bible, and our sermons are good at doing that too, I think, really.
But our sermons don't talk a lot about the Old Testament, for example.
Probably a good thing.
but we can learn a lot from. That's why So I'm aware that it's about 12:30, and so we need to draw things to a close. Is there any last comment anyone would urgently like to make?
My last comment has to do with this, not only the beginning of Lent, but also January 1st and our next 4 years, and how we can stay relevant and optimistic for some who don't feel that that's a strong possibility. And I think particularly there will be times when it will be day by day that we see each other through.
Thank you. Shall we pray together? God of love and life, we thank you for bringing us together in your joy and in your justice. Help us be mindful of your presence in our lives and your presence in every person we meet as we go out of this place to build your commonwealth in our world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.